Namaste everyone. So as you might know, I have been doing the Save Soil series of videos, and one of the things I wanted to do was talk to a few farmers that I knew and just kind of have a casual chat with them about what role soil actually plays in their farming life. Obviously, the we would know that it would be it's the core ingredient and extremely core to the entire farming practice. But I thought it would be amazing for us to talk to actual farmers and kind of just get their perspective as well. So yeah, here I'm talking to Sandeep. I've spoken to him earlier about how he grew a Rudraksh tree on his farm and other spiritual folklore and stories around trees and stuff. And while he is a techie in Bangalore, he is a very passionate farmer and he has a farm just outside of Bangalore, and it's a very intriguing thing he's pursuing. So yeah, let's speak to him. I'm just waiting for him to join, and we will speak with him about soil. Hi Sandeep, great having you here again after quite some time.
Hi, Priyanka. Yeah, pleasure to be here again.
Yeah, and so yeah, we wanted to talk about soil, and so tell us. No, I mean obviously we understand that for farming, soil is the core ingredient. It's not at all optional. So what is but you as a farmer, you're actually working with the soil. Tell us what for you, what is soil, and what are the basic hygiene factors you need to follow, and just what role it has for you as a farmer.
Yeah, like you said, soil is so like intrinsic and very basic to it. Like without it, nothing exists on the farm, right? Like so given that, I mean, obviously, I'm not dissing by saying that there are new technologies now, right? Like there is soilless farming that happens. I have my friends who are very interested in aquaponics and hydroponics and have small to large setups without much use of soil. But I started this because I liked getting myself soiled. So I used to say like getting my hands soiled is why I started doing this. Getting my hands dirty, digging around in the dirt is what gives me the most pleasure. And that's the core crux of any large scale farming systems. So given that, for us, taking care of soil is like taking care of what we do. It's part of it, like, for example, tending to say an animal, or growing, sowing, tilling, plowing, part of all of that, and all of that, not one or multiple of these, part of all of that intrinsically is what effects does it have on soil, right? So in every activity that we do, like for example, maybe when we spoke last time, we didn't have cattle on my farm. I don't know. I don't remember
really?
the exact
No,
timeline. Now
you
we
never
have
spoke
cattle
about
on the
cattle.
farm. Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, so having cattle on the farm.
Wow,
like
you have
the
cattle
main
on your
idea,
farm. That's so cool.
yeah. That's always been on the wish list.
Okay.
It requires some evolution for you to take that step up, because it's a commitment. It's a not a zero maintenance game. Plants can be zero maintenance for a longer period of time. Cattle are maintenance every day, every hour of the day, right? So given that, even when we wanted cattle on the farm, the main reason is it helps the whole efficiency, effectivity, productivity, and just the health of everything that exists on the farm ecosystem.
But that's because you are doing organic, that's why. Otherwise, if somebody was doing the inorganic one, they might just work with machines, isn't it? Or no?
Yeah, I mean, to be very honest, use of cattle for tilling and plowing is practiced, but isn't the sole dependency. Let me tell you, in spite of having cattle right now, we don't really use it for plowing and tilling. These are very young cows and calves we have, so we cannot use them. And these are also not the fully desi nati ones, so they're not as strong. And they're usually bulls are used for more stronger tilling and plowing. I mean, yeah, also cattle is like, one is manure, right? Like just, easy and quick and rich adoption of manure to soil is one of the use of cattle. But even otherwise, let me tell you, traditionally, conventionally, cattle have been part of the farming life cycle in more than one ways. Clearance of cover crops, compaction, right compaction of the soil. Let me tell you, that's very, very
By
important.
compaction, you mean they walk on it so it becomes compact? Is that
kind of? Yes.
okay?
Yes. Compaction because of their hooves on walking around. Compaction because of the cutting of the grass to the right edge. So if you see cattle, like they don't really uproot the grass when they chew on the grass.
They just eat a
Right,
little
so
on top.
they just cut it like how you cut grass with a knife, right? So, and grass typically has like a bell curve. The growth rate of grass is a bell curve. It is slow to begin with, and then very, very rapid, and then again slows down. Okay, so having cattle at the right stage of the grass growth is important to have a cover crop on top of your soil. If you let the grass feed on the let the cow feed on the grass too early, it can uproot it. Just by trying to chew it, it can uproot it because the root system haven't really formed yet. And same can happen when it is too late and it is dry, almost drying up. So right, so in that peak stage of growth is when cattle is best to kind of be left, and that is when you want to control the growth of the grass as well. So see, all of this is kind of the use of cattle on the farm. And I know we kind of veered away, but what I wanted to say is, in doing everything, there is the part of how does this impact the ecosystem that we are part of, and soil is good more than half of what that ecosystem that we speak of. So tilling, plowing, what we are sowing right now within the season, intercropping, use of legumes, checking of nodules. I think I've long time ago, I probably would have read somewhere, it's like your high school science textbook. Soil has its own biology, soil has its own physics, soil has its own chemistry. Soil's biology and physics is what alters the chemistry of the soil, and taking it towards an ideal state is where we kind of work on at our farm, at least in everything that we do. So some of the basic hygiene stuff, as you kind of highlighted, is we avoid at all times flood irrigation. By flood irrigation, it basically means, flood irrigation is what is practiced in India, like probably 9 out of 10 cases. It's basically letting when there is electricity is not a always available commodity on a farm, right? So what farmers do is, when there's electricity, the pump is running for all those whatever 2, 3, 4 hours that the electricity is on. They go turn on the pipeline at one point, one plot of the land, let the water flow, turn it off there, or cap it there and open the cap somewhere else, and it just flows. It's like flood irrigation. And then they make those passages for water to kind of flow through. That's flood irrigation, and we avoid that. We avoid that to large extent possible, because that creates its own set of problems of erosion, topsoil being lost, and ununiform watering, as well as distribution of the soil-based minerals, right? So, and soil itself, what happens is, like when you are flowing, right? Like when you're letting the water flow, in the first parts where the water is flowing, obviously it starts to get saturated, right? Like because the water is just flowing. When does the water start flowing? When the current place where the water is at is saturated. So once it's kind of saturated, it doesn't even try to spread into the horizontally there. It just goes via the vertical gradient that is created by farmers. And that's one of the very not thought of, like it's done and not thought of what impacts it can have, right? Like it is just about making the water reach a particular point. That's not the intent of farming. That's not the intent of why you get water onto the roots. It needs to seep through. It needs to seep through, not just using the gradient, but also horizontally. So that is one thing. And we never practice monocropping, for example. Like it's always short, medium, longer terms, all mixed. And also, it's mixed in a way, it kind of forms a non-uniform way of cropping, which is a little more difficult to manage, actually, to be very honest. The reason why monocropping is followed, I know the reason, right? Like they have valid reasons for it, which is it is easy to maintain, it is easy to deweed. When you have to harvest, it is easy to harvest. But what it doesn't do well is for the ecosystem, is for the soil. It just depends on the same source for the same nutrient at all times, and creates the same kind of both the shrub system, which is on top of the soil, as well as the root system, which is under the soil, which doesn't let minerals and water seep in very well. So it doesn't form a different kind of a root system. And root system, I mean, this is what soil physics is about, right? There's a structure underneath the soil, the kind of pores that are created by roots. The kind of pores that are created determines the kind of worms that can go through those pores. The kind of pores that are created by root system is what determines the kind of nutrients, or like we've spoken of even porous material kind of seeping through the soil system. So all of this kind of matters. So soil physics and soil biology is what kind of maintains and alters the soil chemistry, which you can do just using biology and physics and need not have additional inputs. At least for organic farms like us, you don't need additional inputs, and we don't use them.
So instead of flood irrigation, you're using drip irrigation then. What do you use?
Yeah, drip irrigation, but also at the same point of time, we don't always follow parallel or row planting only. Okay, so you kind of make a mix of plotted planting, raised bed planting, and row planting. And even when you're planting row bed planting, don't make the rows along the direction of the gradient or along the direction of the flow, right? Like find ways where the flow is not the most rapid, and have, horizontal rows kind of created, so that the water then has a resistance to flow, in that particular direction. And that helps saturations be reached much longer after. Right. So, and the reason why people create rows along the flow of the water is it quickly flows. But what's the point of letting the water quickly flow if it is not seeping into the places where it needs to seep in, right? Like what they end up doing is flowing more water than required, hoping that it seeps through. So yeah, it's a mix of like, for example, if you come to our farm, you'll see there's the coconut. Okay. And then coconut obviously has a wider root system right around the stem, right? Like you have the big pit created around the coconut, and the edge of that coconut also takes plants for us, because coconut, the water is kind of stagnated there at the pit of the coconut. We use that to kind of have like things like rhizomes grow well around the coconut roots. Rhizomes basically are, things like ginger, or we also grow a little bit of, turmeric. We grow what is here locally called rasna, but one version of galangal.
Okay.
So these are all plants which come around our bigger tree pits. So coconut, mango, the bottom tree pits take them. So which means the water is where it is stagnated around that. Apart from the coconut tree, these rhizomes are also seeping. So now between the two coconut trees, there's actually a pit created. So, okay, that grows our greens.
I think we've seen it. Usually around a tree, there is tend to be a pit kind of a thing. Maybe it's naturally formed, or whether they've done it deliberately, I don't know.
The farmers created. The farmers created.
But so you're saying within the pit itself, you're putting the ginger and all? Or
the edge of it, the circumference of that pit takes all of these rhizomes.
So then this water that's collected gets used by them.
Exactly. And coconut tree in itself, if you see, understand the coconut's root system, that itself kind of spreads through, right? That is why there's always, the recommended distance between two coconut trees is 25 feet. Anything about 25 feet, to be very honest, because that's how quickly the root system of coconut can go and intertwangle. And in coconut roots, as you can know, it's almost like that the when the coconuts hang onto the bunch, right? The strings which it is hanging onto is very similar to what the coconut's root system is like, very fibrous, very like pokey kind of a root system. So
the dry coconut, the brown hairstyle type
right.
stuff like that.
Yes. So it's very similar to that. So it kind of helps once you have that 25-30 feet distance between the two coconut trees, that you break it down into different kinds of root systems.
But once the coconut tree is really big, you won't really need to water it, right? It will take its own water from the ground, no?
Depends on the season, depends on where you're at, to be very honest, Priyanka. I mean, Bangalore is kind of blessed. So yeah, once it kind of reaches a maturity level, you do not really need to. But in dry seasons, watering here and there doesn't help. It doesn't hinder. It only kind of makes sure that the tree is well fed. And especially if you are doing something like if you're trimming a coconut tree, or sometimes we use salting. That's one way of keeping away pests. Like there are usually beetles which attack coconut. So we actually use normal common salt, to put both to the roots as well as in the shoot system of the coconut. When we do that, to make sure there is enough hydration, we do water it. So yeah, once it reaches maturity, the additional water requirements reduces, but it is never zero.
But so basically all of this is very closely connected. The watering, the soil health, and obviously what the plant needs in terms of its root system, and also the synergy between various plants. As you're saying, you will have the rhizomes around the trees and stuff. So it's all very, very closely connected. It's not like one thing is done only for soil. It's always for multiple aspects.
Oh yeah, it is not independent. All I can say is soil health is not independent of plant health. Plant health is not independent of, say, animal health, which is on your farm. All of them are not independent of your health if you are consuming food from that particular farm. So in some way you can, say soil health equals to your health in a parallel universe as well. So and it's controllable, controllable in a way where there's the whole science of precision agriculture, etc., as well, right? Like where you try to get down to micronutrients, macronutrient stage, etc., and that's usually formed and practiced in non-organic chemical based farming, where you are able to measure and thus additionally enhance that much amount of nutrient into a soil. But once you add X amount this season, the next season's requirement is always going to be 1.2x, right? Because the soil loses its fertility. I mean, look, energy is neither created nor destroyed, just formed, transformed from one form to another, right? So you are growing stuff, you are reaping stuff, you are cultivating and harvesting stuff out of the soil. So which means soil is losing something. You need to replenish that. In organic way of doing it, the way we do it, we're not really about precision, we're about practice. We're more about making sure that the soil remains healthy irrespective of whether you are cultivating or not. Let me tell you, like, we have something called as cover crops all the time, in our fields. That is why watering is required even when I'm not harvesting or when reaches maturity. Cover crop basically is, we try and make sure that the soil is not directly exposed to sun as much as possible. There's always a mulch cover, whether I'm growing something or not. There's always a mulch cover. It could be grass, it could be like, there are lots of cover crops like sun hemp, right? Like, and I think in Hindi it's called dhencha, which is a fairly widely used cover crop. When it dries up, you can just till it over into the soil, easily decomposable. There are even some cover crops which are harvestable, like for example, cowpea. I don't know what it is called in other languages. In Kannada, it is called halsandi. Cowpea is it's a string bean kind of a vegetable. You don't eat it like a bean most times. You actually make seeds out of it, and they're very protein rich. But another important reason why we cultivate cowpea is after we have harvested, we have no use of that plant to be kind of removed anything. We just plow the field with the plant. And what it also does, and we sometimes follow this, we even when we are plowing it, we don't plow with deeper blades. So which means we don't uproot them completely. We just cut them off at the ground level. We let the root system remain. What that helps is for the next sowing when we do, right, the rooting becomes easier. Like if you remove the existing rooting system, then soil has a tendency to become compact, right? When you step on it, when there are no pores. I mean, it's as simple as having a stick in a popsicle, right? Like in an ice candy, if you have put the stick already while putting it in the freezer, it's much easier to remove the popsicle or put anything back in. But if it is already frozen, then you cannot pierce the popsicle stick into the ice candy, right? So that is what the rooting system does. If the soil becomes compact like ice freezing, then the next root will have more effort, energy to be spent to penetrate into that soil system. So we let the root system remain, till very light, and then get the next seeds in. And that way, even when I don't have a crop on, my earthworms remain in soil.
That's what I was thinking of, that the bug culture is very important, right, for the soil. So
yeah.
But then you were also saying that different plants encourage different kind of bugs. So isn't that a problem? Like,
no, that is not. I mean, look, there are the whole microbe world, and there are the whole macroorganism world in the soil too. Okay, so here what we are talking of is like earthworm is a macroorganism. You can see it, you can touch it, you can feel it, hold it, add it into soil, remove it from the soil, everything, right? Just like a cattle or a hen for that matter. They are like farmers' pets. So when you're talking of these macroorganisms in the world, it includes even things like larvae, pupa of butterflies. You'll actually see when you come down to farm, and this is one thing which we're very, very, very happy about, is this is the season when it's just rained and there's not too hot sun. My farm is full of butterflies.
wow.
2 months ago, it was full of larvae pupa just going around, which seemed and eating all my lemon leaves. Let me tell you, these butterflies, when they are young in the larvae stage, they love these citrus plant leaves. If you have one even in your home, let me tell you, you will find these green insects chomping away your lemon trees, and many people just kill them. 2 months ago, that was the stage that farm was in, and now it's full of butterflies. So these are all macroorganisms, and they survive like us. They survive. They need shelter. They need nutrients which are easy to touch, feel, and smell, and find. So they need to exist, and for that, whatever exists within the soil, I think creating that shelter, creating that pore, not disturbing them by using heavy tilling, not compacting them by even heavy rollers. I mean, it's probably less of a challenge in Indian farms because they're small scale farm, but in large scale farms, even mechanization, right? Like heavy tillers, heavy rollers compact the soil more than tilling the soil at times. So, and that kind of kills the macroorganisms. While when it comes to microorganisms that we are speaking of, that is what I've said. Each plant kind of encourages different kind of microorganisms. Like if you see, basically legumes, right? Like if you legumes are any of these beans kind of plants. Take your French beans, or take your all pulses and lentils, dal. Like we have planted arhar, or what is called tuar dal, on the farm right now. When you pull the roots out, you'll see small nodules, created in their roots. Those actually are basically uh, porous nutrient distributing engines within the root system, which helps your bacteria and fungi exist. I mean, I think I'll be preaching, to a high school kid about the nitrogen fixation cycle, about rhizomes, nitrogen fixation, bacteria, the carbon fixation cycle. Carbon fixation cycle is a little more macro and physical substance based, while nitrogen fixation is a lot more micro and microbes involved. So this crop rotation is very important. That is why monocrop culture is not healthy. And traditionally, conventionally, the systems of farming were dependent on multi-cropping, intercropping, but the you know demands of efficiency, demands of large scale food, and demands of just variety, I think variety at scale as well kind of disturbed that. So if you remember, like for example, I take this example to a lot of my North Indian friends. Oh, the movies that you see, the Hindi movies that you see in the sarson ka khet that you see in Punjab and all, right? Like sarson for a long period of time. Why the reason why sarson and gehu is associated with Punjab is because these two are, intercropping, varieties. Always when gehu was distributed onto or sowed in the fields, there was interspersed mustard sowing as well. It just helped fixing more sunlight. That is actually part of the carbon fixation cycle. So by having different kind of plants, gehu and all cereals for that matter, rice and ragi and wheat in different parts of the country, are a very grass-like plant, right? Like they grow like grass blades. They don't have too high surface area of chlorophyll absorption, sunlight absorption, right? And they're very dense, like they're grass and they're very dense. So that is why interspersing of a plant like mustard, which has very weavy, different shaped leaves and thus larger surface area, just helps. It doesn't block the sunlight to reaching the wheat or rice or ragi plants, and still absorbs and fixes carbon into the ground below, which is not exposed anymore to the sun. So these are some of the practices. This is why it is important to know, like, importance of a plant like legumes, in encouraging the living organisms, living microbes, like we spoke earlier. The importance of plants like mustards in a wheat field, fixing sunlight and carbon into the soil is important. Both are impacting the soil, but in different ways. One through micro, one through sunlight. So yeah, this is why, like what I was talking about earlier, like leaving the root systems as it is, involving different microbes, and still making sure that you're not falling into the trap of same plant, same season, same, alternate next year. That is going to saturate the soil. That is going to saturate the soil with the same root system. If you keep making the pores the same way in the soil is going to become so porous that it will, it'll lose its moisture holding capacity as well, right? Like the water will just start seeping through. A good example, let me tell you, like we had two patches in our farm. Like I think we must have spoken in my farm, podcast. We have different plots of the farm where the soil quality itself is different. We didn't make it uniform. We didn't get soil from anywhere and dump it to make it uniform. And so much so that they're also in different level, which we are using, I said, right? Like we're using it for irrigation without any electricity, just gravitational force. Now, two of my low-lying farm plots had very porous sandy soil. It still has the same kind of soil, but it was so like bad in terms of the porosity, that it was so porous. It was nice, the soil, in terms of having sandy soil is good. You have specific type of crops you can grow in that particular soil, but it was so porous because of not having cultivated, not having taken care the right way, that if we water that, there was a small little pond which used to get created in the next farm because the water just used to seep, and there were underground channels with which it used to just flow out. So that means there was no more, water holding capacity at all, which means it was never grown like things like grass, which have root system which are spread out, which are just not going like this, but are like growing just like how the grass grows, right? Like grass, the way it grows on top is the way grass's roots grows on the bottom. So now we, for a long period of time, we've let it kind of have the cover crops on. So now it has gained some moisture holding capacity. So when we water that patch, there's not a pool which is formed in the next, plot. So yeah, these are some of the ways that you kind of keep your soil, well aerated. So again, as I said, right, like we're all speaking of what we spoke of is soil physics and soil, biology, which is what organisms live in the soil, what is the porosity, what is the structure of the soil, what is the compaction of the soil. All of this impacts the soil chemistry, which we do not measure. Let me tell you, I do not, we've got our soil tested very early on, but this is not something which, it's not test tube. I'm not trying to add this much of boron, this much of phosphorus and nitrogen, and this will make it perfect. So yeah.
Sandeep, it is interesting you're speaking about the soil losing its water carrying capacity when it's not taken care of with proper planting and stuff, because the soil videos I wanted to do with related to Save Soil movement by Sadhguru, and earlier a few years back he started this whole rally for rivers thing and Kaveri calling, which were both about the importance of agroforestry and improving the water table and the river water, which are all very connected because of a very similar reasoning, that first of all you need your trees and stuff to hold your topsoil in place, and that's where the water percolates inside and it carries the water. I mean, obviously the reasoning, like I'm just doing a very verbatim summary job, but they've given a whole reasoning over there. But the point is, what you mentioned is exactly the point is, then Sadhguru came up with Save Soil, and for a while it was like, what is going on? He was all about river and water, and now he jumped to soil. How is this happening? But then he also at some point mentioned, and I think this was exactly the connection, because he was always trying to talk about this whole thing being connected, the kind of planting and all of that that's happening, the kind of agriculture taking place, water wastage, especially what you also mentioned about flood irrigation versus drip, because that was also leading to some amount of water wastage and all. So it's just interesting you're bringing it, because that was the link, and it took me a while also to link the two up, because otherwise for me it was like, why are these two different eco campaigns taking place? But they weren't exactly different.
Yeah, I mean, look, in nature they are not. One is gonna affect the other, and whatever my focus has been is kind of limited to the few acres of land that we till and what we want to achieve within that, right? Like we try to create as much diversity in that ecosystem, small ecosystem, as possible. But again, it's not always possible. I cannot create a river stream, on my farm, right? Like there's always going to be water flow. I mean, but you got to kind of channelize it. Now there's another way of thinking, again, saying you shouldn't try to deviate the flow of water from its natural direction, etc. Right? But yeah, I still want to, if the water is going to flow through my land, I will. Like for example, in my own farm as well, the water is kind of brought to a stage where it was getting stagnated. So from there, we kind of created a gradient through the rocky structure. So this is another reason why I think we spoke of as well. Rocky structures are important to make sure that water can flow through them. You know, rocky structures have different uses of it. You know, rocks have better mineral holding capacity than soils do, and slow release. See, because we follow organic farming, everything is about, you know, slow returns, slow impact, etc. Right? And rocks are a big part of that. And we use rocks and our tree. If you see in our farm, our timber-based trees are all along the border of the farm. So they kind of make sure that when the water also flows around the border of our farms. We've made sure that water is kind of channelized around the farm and almost kind of creating a moat-like structure to the farm. You know, that to cross the boundary of the farm, you have to cross a, you know, small water flow that kind of exists. So yeah, these are all kind of things which you manipulate. Farming is manipulating, right? Like, you know, in many ways, we are manipulating the natural world to give us what we want. Okay, and it is the choice of each system of farming to what extent we kind of manipulate that, right? Like there's the whole thing of GMO where you are altering the DNA of the you know, seed itself so that the generations to come yield one particular type of, you know, crop only. Then there's the other ways of doing this, which is using the nature to manipulate the nature itself, using the rock to manipulate water, using the plant to manipulate soil, using the soil to manipulate the yield. So yeah, organic and natural farming practices, and these are all mixed. Look, I do not subscribe to one school of farming for that matter, like organic, natural, no-till, zero budget, agroforestry, food forest. Even within the school of, you know, without chemical farming, no chemical farming, there is various other classes of these. I do not subscribe to one or the other, but I think just knowing by what it is, there is a little bit of each one of these that we follow in different patches, different seasons, etc. Like, yes, we do follow agroforestry because, you know, it is a multi-cropping between, you know, tomatoes and sitafals. It is a, you know, multi-cropping between my like the spreadable crops like pumpkin and watermelon as well. We're trying to grow some watermelon this time, which is interspersed with plants which grow taller, because watermelons and pumpkins kind of spread on the ground and they almost become like a, you know, cover crop, although they don't go into roots. Right? So we have a mixed school of aspects across the board. And in terms of having, you know, what you kind of refer to, I read your rally for rivers versus save as soil as two elements, right? Like water and soil. They have connectivity because of the fact that, yes, you got to avoid, you know, erosion. And let me tell you, agroforestry is not actually as much about topsoil. It's actually about, you know, soil erosion deeper as well. The reason why there needs to be plants and larger trees around flowing water is because if they don't exist, the water is going to start creeping into, you know, the soils which are underneath the topsoil as well. Topsoil, the flowing river is not going to touch the topsoil of the next land, right? What it is going to touch is the bottom area where the roots are going down. That is where, when there's a water flowing, the trees start toppling next to them, the pole starts toppling next to them, there is, you know, landfall, you know, next to them. That is because there are no, you know, strong holding roots of the trees around there. So that is more important, and that is why even rock structures are important. That is
Talk
why.
about water percolation inside.
Yeah, so
isn't that what helps the water table remain good?
Yeah, so groundwater system is a little more complex, to be very honest. Aquifers are what they're called. Basically, aquifers are where waters are held. So if you are if you're digging for a bore well, what you're trying to find is an aquifer. And sometimes it's a pool aquifer, which means it's kind of collected in stagnant water. So, it's basically super saturated porous rock. You never find, water where there is no rocks. When it is super sandy soil, porous, like what I was mentioning, right? A couple of plots on my farm, you will not find water there because the water just seeps through and flows to the, next
Nearby
possible
patches, yeah.
aquifer that might be there. And however deep, this is true to deep more, earth that exists as well. Aquifers are always super saturated rocks. So and when there is rock structures, as much as the rock in itself doesn't absorb water as much as the soil does, rocks are a channeling system. Rocks have crevices and cracks which channel water. That is why I use the rock structures in my farm to have a stream kind of created, right? So because there the water doesn't get absorbed, it flows. And that way, and in my farm, on top of the surface, the water flows horizontally. In the groundwater systems, it basically flows, vertically down as well. So that is why it is important to have, an aquifer creating ecosystem. You cannot control it as much. And that is why I said not all of these practices that I'm speaking of is to kind of influence it the right way, but you cannot control groundwater movement. There is no science to finding where the water can be available, how long the water can be available.
That is true, but at the end, you as you mentioned, you do need certain components to be in place.
Absolutely, yes. That is what you kind of do. And you got to kind of know, not just believe, know that doing the right things in a whole ecosystem at a scale, right? Like, we're not talking of like digging a well next to your 1,000 square feet home. We're talking of farming ecosystems of
as a whole,
thousands of square kilometers of land. And if the practices are followed right across the board, there's fair proof in the pudding that your groundwater systems are going to be recharged, your groundwater systems are going to come up, and you will have enough to sustain for good practices of farming. And that is what these are kind of interconnected again, right? Like flood irrigation makes your water flow away. Your stagnant irrigation helps you. Drip irrigation, stagnant irrigation, even sprinkler based irrigations are good because they help you seep vertically down, which increases the chances of your groundwater being recharged. And rocks are a big part of that.
Great. So coming to this, like you've spoken of the very diversity on your farm, and also we do need some of these components for the overall well-being and health of the ecosystem. But how much can really be followed? Because your case is a little different, right? As far as I understand, this is your passion project kind of a thing, and it's not like you're dependent on this for your livelihood, on your family's livelihood. So when you talk about the actual farmers out there who are doing that as a livelihood, how much feasible this is? And the second corollary to this question is the fact that Sadhguru has been mentioning, if everyone moves to organic, the food yield will drop. So what is that about? So the two aspects of this question.
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably disappoint you with my answer because there is no absolute answer to that, right? Like, I'm not an expert. Like, to be very honest, I'm doing what I want to do, and I agree with you. I'm at a very privileged place of being able to do what I want to do, and not just being not just to be doing what I should be or forced to be doing for bread and butter, right? So and I agree emphatically that yield in organic, if not lower, very slower. Okay, so you might be able to make up for the yield, but in a long period of time. And today, food consumption and production story is different. I mean, this is decades and centuries of practices kind of having to be reversed, right? So and there are good examples of both ways, where at some places organic farmers have made a sizable dent in increasing the quality as well as not decreasing the quantity or food security as it kind of gets termed in a scale and economic scale. But at the same point of time, I think it has also got some bad name. I think Sri Lanka is a good case, although I personally believe that it is not just that at play. There's a lot of
No,
things which
definitely
come.
not just that at play. I think a lot of proof is also there of that many.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So, but at the same point of time, I think for the way we are consuming and producing, I do not think it is it logistically, physically, as well as statistically can be a switch which can be turned on, turned off. Okay. But at the same point of time, what should be, just like how we encourage diversification within the organic way of farming, right? I think having as much of, I think, I don't know if I'm accurate, but only about close to 1% of the world's cultivable land is under organic farming. 1%. Okay, so you and me talking about this is making literally no impact on food cultivation, right? So I think growing that should be a very, very, very long-term plan. It has taken decades and centuries to kind of adopt into the practices that commercial food production has adopted now, which is largely chemical based, monoculture based, large scale farming. To reverse that, it may take longer. I think we need to accept that it may take longer. If it took us 200 years to get to here, it may take us 400 years to turn the wheel back on it. But that has to kind of start is probably where it matters. The quality has to come in. Maybe we may have to give up, and maybe we are not ready for it yet. Maybe that is why it will take just a century. Just imagine, right? Like we grow tomatoes, chilies, potatoes here in India, none of which are from India. They all kind of were brought in from all over the world. For a single meal that we have, the amount, not really in terms of how much you're eating of one stuff, but the different kind of ingredients that are going into a single meal of yours could be anywhere between 25 to 100, like including your jeera and elaichi and
Especially
clove
India.
and
I mean,
rice
Indian
and
dishes are so
salt.
complex.
Yeah, and so is it everywhere. It has become like that everywhere. The amount of ingredients that are used, in terms of sides, and like traditionally, maybe Indians kind of followed a roti sabzi. In South India, there are lots of times and places, and even us sometimes eat something called as ganji, right? Like, which is broth, rice broth, basically, which is nothing but rice and salt.
Yeah.
Indeed, it's non-hulled rice. That is why it is made into broth, because it is boiled for a long, long, long period of time. It is not so soft. After that, it becomes a slimy soup-like broth, and only thing that is added to it is salt and mixed with pickles and had. Right, so that was like 3-4 ingredients to what we typically consume between 20 to 100 ingredients for every meal. So that diversification means each individual crop has to be grown at a scale, because each one of us are eating 100 different varieties, right? So yeah, it's not an easy wheel to turn back on, and we may not be able to turn back many of those things at all. But yeah, it will increase the quality. It will increase longevity of being able to do this in our control, rather than when it just stops. Like, you don't eat elaichi anymore because you don't grow elaichi. It could be one possibility of doing it, or it could be that I will eat good less elaichi once in a while when there is a kheer to be made, and that way I'll be able to eat it for a few more centuries at the least. So those are some of the choices. Again, as I said, these are me talking very, very philosophically. Practically, even I'm in the same boat. I grow 10 stuff but eat 100 stuff, right? So only things which we have been able to capture a lot back on is our fresh food consumption. That we grow a lot, we eat a lot more than lot more of what we grow only and not bought from elsewhere. We still don't grow cereals, which is large part of our carb consumption, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, we don't really do dairy, so all the dairy consumption is not from the farm. So yeah, it's difficult to kind of sit here and preach, but practically kind of start inching towards it. And for all of that, you got to take care of the ecosystem around you.
Yep, great. I think that was good, Sandeep. Thanks for shedding light on stuff, and it was really great specifically to talk to an actual farmer, because one is that I knew nothing about this except those very theoretically organic labels and all that. It's only because of Sadhguru's Rally for River and also because I volunteered with it that I read more of the material and what exactly he's speaking. Otherwise, even his message, because it gets split into tiny videos, right? We don't really know what he's saying. We just hear these catchy stuff floating around. But obviously, once we listen to him, then obviously one becomes curious to know what is an actual farmer saying. And as you have mentioned, you are the actual organic farmer. If at all I go and speak to someone who's not organic, he'll give me the whole perspective of that side. So
maybe you should do the next
yeah.
one, on a farm with a farmer just by the roadside, just
non-organic.
just
I
get
want
down to a farmer who doesn't know you as well, just is working on his land, and maybe he'll pick up the soil and tell you exactly what is there and what is not there,
and what are the
he
challenges also he faces, right? Like why he can't simply go to organic and all that stuff. But I do have another farmer I'm hoping to bring on. I know the person. He's more into agroforestry. So I'm quite excited to talk to him because he's passionately pushing the government to make agroforestry legal. Because there's so much red tape, right, around agroforestry. Like, so I'm so excited about his story. I even put a blog about it, but I'm saying let him come on video and it's really fun. So yeah, but after that, maybe I can look at some non-organic, very commercial farm setup. That might be interesting.
Makes sense.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sandeep.